My name is James Carter. I'm 42 years old now, but I was only 25 when my father died. My father, Richard Carter, had built a small business in Columbus, Ohio from the ground up. Through years of hard work, he turned it into a successful company. But despite everything he achieved, he always said his greatest wealth was his family. My father used to tell me one thing: "James, if you lose money in business, you can earn it again, but if you lose your character, you lose everything." His closest business partner was Victor Hayes. I had known Victor since I was a child. He often came to our house, spent hours discussing business with my father, and seemed like part of our family. But even as a kid, I sensed something strange. Victor was never truly happy about my father's success. Then, one night, everything changed. My father was driving home after an important business meeting when his car crashed on a dangerous stretch of road. The police called it an accident. My father died at the scene. My world collapsed. A few days later, Victor came to our house. He hugged me and said, "James, your father was like a brother to me. If you ever need anything, you can count on me." At the time, I believed him. But deep inside, one question refused to disappear. My father was an extremely careful driver, so how had his car suddenly gone out of control that night? I read the police report several times, searching for an answer, but nothing made sense. Years passed. Instead of taking over my father's company, I chose an ordinary job and tried to move on with my life. I wanted to forget the past. Then, almost 15 years after my father's death, I found an old wooden chest in the storage room of his house. Inside were photographs, business papers, and several old files. As I opened one of them, a small handwritten note fell onto the floor. I immediately recognized my father's handwriting. It said, "If anything happens to me, do not trust Victor Hayes." My hands began to shake. I opened the rest of the file. Inside were financial records showing that large amounts of money had disappeared from the company's accounts, and every suspicious transaction led back to the same person, Victor Hayes. For the first time, I wondered if my father's death had never been an accident after all. But I had no evidence strong enough to accuse Victor. So I made a decision. I would not let anger control me. If my father had been murdered, I would uncover the truth. I would not seek revenge with violence. I would seek justice with evidence. And I had no idea that the first clue was already waiting for me inside that old file. For the next several months, I studied my father's old files. I tracked down a former accountant named Mark Wilson, who had worked with my father for years. When I arrived at his house, he looked at me for a long moment and said, "I knew you would come looking for me someday." I was stunned. Mark told me that shortly before his death, my father had confided in him. Richard believed someone inside the company was involved in a massive financial fraud. He was convinced Victor wanted control of the company, Mark said. Then Mark handed me an old USB drive. "Your father gave this to me. He told me that if anything happened to him, I was supposed to give it to you." I took it home that night. When I opened the drive, I found a video. My father appeared on the screen. He looked tired, but his voice was steady. "James, if you're watching this, I may not be here anymore. I don't know what's going to happen to me, but I believe Victor Hayes has been stealing from the company. I've saved evidence. If something happens to me, follow the records." Then the video ended. I stared at the screen for several minutes. There was no longer any doubt in my mind. My father had been afraid for his life. I contacted an experienced attorney named Sarah Mitchell. She carefully reviewed everything I had collected. "These documents are important," she told me, "but we need something that directly connects Victor to your father's death." We went back through the old police report. The damaged car had been taken to a local repair shop after the crash. We tracked down the shop owner, Thomas Reed. At first, Thomas was reluctant to talk, but when I showed him my father's photograph, his expression changed. "I've carried the secret for 15 years, he finally said. Thomas explained that when he inspected my father's car, he noticed something unusual with the brake system. It didn't look like normal accident damage, he said. Someone may have tampered with the brakes. Then he pulled an old folder from a cabinet. Inside were photographs of the car, repair records, and the original inspection report. But one document caught my attention immediately. It was a receipt from the day before the accident. The name of Victor Hayes's company was printed on it. My heart started pounding. We finally had a connection. But Victor was still powerful, wealthy, and well protected. And somehow, he learned that I was investigating my father's death. One evening, I received a message from an unknown number. It contained only one sentence. "Leave the past buried, James. Some doors are dangerous to open." I knew exactly who had sent it. Victor. I stared at the message for a long time. Years ago, I might have been afraid, but not anymore. My father had left me a trail, and I was going to follow it all the way to the truth. I didn't know what Victor would do next, but I knew one thing for certain. This time, I wasn't going to let him bury the truth with my father. The trial began, and Victor's attorney immediately tried to discredit every piece of evidence we had. He argued that I had nothing more than old documents and an unverified video. Victor sat quietly in the courtroom. He looked confident. He believed he would walk away free once again. But Sarah presented the evidence one piece at a time. First came the financial records, then my father's video, then Mark Wilson's testimony. Finally, Thomas Reed took the stand. He told the court that my father's brake system had been deliberately tampered with. Victor's expression changed. For the first time, I saw fear in his eyes. Then Sarah presented the final piece of evidence, an old bank record. It showed that 2 days before my father's death, a large payment had been transferred from Victor's company into a hidden account. That account belongs to a man who had received money to tamper with my father's car. The courtroom fell completely silent. Victor had nowhere left to hide. The investigation was reopened, and eventually the evidence proved that Victor had been involved in both the financial fraud and the plan that led to my father's death. He was convicted. When I walked out of the courthouse, a reporter approached me. "James, did you finally get revenge for your father?" I stood there for a moment. Then I answered, "No, I didn't get revenge. I simply brought my father's truth back into the light." That evening, I went to my father's grave. I stood there for a long time before finally speaking. "Dad, it took me years, but I never forgot you." I pulled the old note from my pocket, the same note my father had written all those years ago. "Do not trust Victor Hayes." I placed it beside his grave. "You were right, Dad." A few months later, I took over my father's company. I never changed its name. The sign outside the building still reads, Richard Carter Enterprises. I wanted my father's name to live on, not only in business, but in the life I built because of him. That experience taught me something I will never forget. Revenge isn't always about destroying the person who hurt you. Sometimes the greatest revenge is exposing the lie they spent years trying to protect. My father could never come back, but now the truth was known. He hadn't died because of some random accident. He had been the victim of a carefully planned betrayal. And I had finally kept the promise I never got the chance to make while he was alive. I didn't destroy Victor. I didn't become like him. I simply made sure the truth survived. And sometimes that is the strongest revenge of all.